Okay, so talk to me about this paper.
Okay.
Like, where did it come from?
So I'll give you the whole story.
Yeah.
In the late 1980s, I was a good drinker in high school and college. I wasn't a pro, but I was semi-pro. And I stopped drinking in the late 1980s because I wanted to have a career and maybe have a family. And started on that path, that kind of like self-reflective path, therapy, Buddhism, meditation. I taught meditation, the whole 9 yards. And I got to a point where I started studying neuroscience and neurology and how our bodies work and how our brains work. And the more I studied neurology, the more I came to realize, we don't lead with cognition. We lead with our bodies. Our bodies tell us, they dictate sort of what we feel and what we're going to do. We can use our minds to create stories and narratives around those feelings. So like, you're in a relationship, your girlfriend breaks up with you, you get this terrible feeling, you're anxious, your amygdala is squeezing, you're like, and you create a narrative, right? So you create a story, oh, she's a terrible person, la, la, la. But we lead with our bodies, and it's neurotransmitters, it's hormones, it's the way our electrical impulses work. So that became the thing that I was most interested in. And it was across all spectrum. So I wrote a little book called, Behaving Badly, the Neurology of acting like an asshole. And it's all about why we behave like assholes based upon responding to the impulses in our bodies.
But why do we behave like assholes?
Because we are completely unaware that we're creating stories and narratives around feelings, and we can't step back and say, why am I having this feeling? What's going on in my body right now that's compelling me to act a certain way?
So are we kind of shooting from the hip, reacting rather than
I would say most
dissecting?
People are shooting from the hip. Yeah. I mean, I think that the benefit of therapy, on one hand, is that it provides you with some tools to be able to step back and observe yourself in the world. But it doesn't change us. We have this neurological sort of homeostatic point based upon who we are, how we were raised, what happened in utero. I mean, it's very, it's complex. But we are wired from birth. We are wired as we grow up to react to stimuli a certain way. So therapy gives us awareness, but it doesn't change the fact that that's how our bodies react. So knowing about your body, being able to say, ooh, this is how I'm feeling, and actually being able to play with that. So you can use imagination. You can use I give you an example. I was in a very committed relationship. It didn't work out. I was in extraordinary pain. Like my body was just not happy. And in your 50s when that happens, I don't know how old all y'all are, but when you're in your 50s, and I'm at the end of my 50s, one's heart and one's body do not respond well to so much adrenaline and cortisol. So I had to trick my body into feeling better. So, you can do that with chemicals, but I didn't want to do that with chemicals. So I tricked my body by creating a narrative that this person who had, that we had broken up was a bad person. She's not. She's a great person. But it helped me go through the process of a year of healing where my body felt better and better. And then I could come back to like, okay, yeah, she's a great person. That's how neurology works, where we are, in many ways, we don't have awareness around it. And that lack of awareness can be catastrophic. Because I would have been an asshole if I had written her shitty emails, if I'd, gone on Facebook, which I don't use, and said, and that's the asshole step. The tweaking one's thought process to feel better, well, that's just figuring out how to move through a world that can be hard.
Are you aware of all my back issues I've had?
A teeny bit.
Yeah, so I've had back issues now for a couple of years. I had a microdiscotomy because I had a herniated disc and sciatica, and that repaired it. And I still had the occasional issue with my back. And I've talked about it on Twitter and talked about it on the podcast. I've had a lot of people, like an incredible amount of people write to me. Quite a few have recommended a book called Healing Back Pain and refer to the idea that I don't need surgery. By the way, I did need surgery. I had a herniated disc, But since then, that some of the issues I may be having are actually to do with some kind of trauma in my past that I've not fully dealt with, which there is, some truth to that. If I was going to be vulnerable and honest on this podcast, I have a divorce which was traumatic, and I've never fully dealt with that. Do you buy into that?
Absolutely. There's a lot of data out there that point to that our bodies store so much experience. And there's actually a book called The Body Knows the Score, I think, or The Body Remembers the Score, which is all about veterans from war and how they come back and why they experience this thing we call PTSD, because their bodies store the memories. And I had experienced complex trauma as a child, the death of a sister, tricky childhood. And my body stored all of that. It actually created for me a very difficult experience around relating in an intimate way to other people. And that became part of my practice over those, years and years of I won't call it sobriety because I'm not sure that I was a drunk, but of kind of going on that that path of trying to understand why I moved through the world the way I did, and relating on a sort of deep and emotional and connected level to other human beings has always been really hard for me.
So where is the collective part of this?
When you say collective.
So your thesis, how Bitcoin ends via its destruction of our collective and individual neurologies. Right. We've just talked about individual elements of neurology. What do you mean by collective?
So there's in my opinion, there's a collective way in which we move through the world as, sort of this human organism that it's not only imitative, like, oh, I see someone driving a Lamborghini. That looks exciting. I think I'm going to, I aspire to having a Lamborghini. Yeah. But it's almost like part of collective memory. There's this epigenetic part of us that I don't think we understand very well, that we are hundreds of years, thousands of years of human experience is encoded and embedded in us at a cellular level. And so when I say that Bitcoin saves the collective, I'm almost thinking of it in terms of the Borg from Star Trek. The terrifying thing about the Borg is they're a collective who feel that, they're righteous, they're good, they're like, we're fine, resistance is futile and we're going to add you to our own. And that's what it feels like the human species has slowly become. And then my thesis is because it began with the commercial revolution and the creation of credit and debt. And in my paper, I don't have a ton of, data to back up such a thesis, because anybody could say, well, why didn't it begin X, Y, or Z? But I think the collective downfall of humanity in terms of our collective neurologies began several hundred years ago.
And have you done any work looking at kind of like collective behaviors of humans versus, say, animals or insects? We were discussing bees the other days, and bees tend to operate in a collective and know their role, and there's almost an automation that's coded into them of how they operate. Whereas with animals, say in the animal kingdom, there's like maybe more of a hierarchy, but there's a little bit more individualism. And then when you get to humans, we can act collective, like in a collective, but we can fork out individually because we are a little bit more conscious, higher intelligence to make decisions. You can see collective responses or behaviors on Twitter or outside of Twitter, but you can also see individuals rise up and be slightly different. Have you compared these?
Yeah, so I don't know if I totally agree with that analysis. That human beings can act individually. My belief is that when we seemingly are branching out from the zeitgeist of the collective, we're actually not. We're branching out into something we've seen, something that fits us in terms of our neurology. But it's not this idea of, individuality. I believe that human beings are relational beings. And one of the reasons there's so many mental health struggles right now is that we think somehow that we're not. And we think somehow that things, money, stuff can fill that part of us that is relational, which is one of the reasons I believe that libertarianism is I know I'm going to incur the wrath of some of your audience, but I'm not so sure that Bitcoin is a libertarian construct.
Okay.
I think it's a communitarian construct. Small communities who are working toward the benefit of each other, which is what the network is, right? We want more and more people to be part of the network because that strengthens the network. Hoarding Bitcoin is antithetical to its strength and its success. So I'm not sure.
Can you expand on that? What hoarding Bitcoin? Why is that antithetical to its strength?
Because if someone or a country or an individual collects more and more Bitcoin, the network is inherently weakened because the network is strengthened by, the more nodes there are that are validating transactions, the more people who are participating in this. Not only as an asset class does it seemingly become more valuable, but as a relational construct. So,
are you talking here about distribution of coins rather than, or are you talking about the movement of coins and being used as a medium of exchange?
I think distribution more than a medium of exchange.
So when Michael Saylor has 120,000 Bitcoin, that is a large concentration. The network would be stronger if there was 120,000 people owning one Bitcoin each.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can agree with that, but I don't know if it's a zero-sum game. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if it's a zero-sum game either. I just look at Bitcoin. I mean, I don't look at Bitcoin as an investment. I did it first. I don't look at see Bitcoin as something that, like Michael Saylor says, it's going to be digital real estate. This is going to be your block on Madison Avenue. I don't look at it like that either. I see it as this thing that we don't totally understand. And yet, if we had a monetary system or a system of information exchange, a system of sharing information and transacting that was absolutely inviolable, and that we could trust because it's being verified by the millions and millions of nodes that are verified, then all of a sudden that relational aspect heals us. We're no longer in this frenzy of following the collective toward the cliff. And in this case, I mean, trying to make as much money as we possibly can and use that money as a way to experience the world.
So you think the issue here is the rat race, the accumulation of stuff, whether that is status or assets or property, that you never really get to the enough point. So like somebody's got 100 grand wants a million, someone who's got a million wants 10 million. There's like that constant more. Eats away at our time. We trade off health often, not everyone, but sometimes we trade off health, time with our family, love, all for this. Is this where you're going?
Well, if I were to go back to neurology,
Yeah.
And sort of, because that's sort of the thesis of the paper. My belief is that we have a homeostatic, again, like when I say a homeostatic, like sort of place as a collective and as individuals, we are stimulated in a certain way. And 300 years ago, that baseline was different than it is now. 300 years ago, somebody could go off into the woods and go bobcat hunting, and that would meet their need for adrenaline and dopamine. That would meet their sort of stimulatory needs. 300 years later, trillionaires need to fly out into outer space. So my belief is that it's not so much the accumulation of stuff, it's the need for stimulation, the need for adrenaline, the need for dopamine, the need for this physiological experience. And we've built over generations and centuries a tolerance.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So there will always be a need for stimulation.
Absolutely.
Okay. And that's not a bad thing.
No.
But we've built a individual and collective tolerance, depending on who you are. And two things come to mind. Firstly, if we built that tolerance, it becomes harder and harder to achieve that dopamine hit that we need. But also, are we so wrapped up in our life that we're not spending enough time on stimulation, and spending more times on the things we think that will get us to stimulation?
Which is stimulation.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm, day trading because I want to become a millionaire, that's giving me my dopamine hits. Just
Right.
that process. So I think that the journey and the end are neurologically compatible. The journey to become a multimillionaire and the actual being, and then using that money to, buy the dopamine hits or the adrenaline. I wouldn't distinguish between the two.
And can we potentially create fake goals that we think we want to be a millionaire, and when we get there, there's a disappointment?
Sure. And then we look for, and I don't know if I would use the word disappointment. I think I would use the word, again, neurologically, like a lack of stimulation. Like, oh, I need more. What am I going to do? I'm going to buy a BMW. Well, that didn't do it. Well, I'm going to buy, a Maserati. Well, that didn't do it. Now what am I going to do?
It's Aston Martin that does it.
Are they good?
Yeah.
I don't have a car.
No, but actually, everything you're saying is true.
Yeah.
I've been through all these steps.
Yeah. And it doesn't, I'm not a big fan of, what's his name? Glenn Beck. Again, your audience probably will roll their eyes when I say I'm liberal left when it comes to sort of ideology. I'm not libertarian and I'm not conservative right. There's a guy named Glenn Beck who used to do a conservative talk show.
I know, yeah.
Not my favorite guy, whatever. And he talked about one Christmas that he bought everything he possibly could that his kids wanted. He said it was the worst Christmas ever. And I was like, I like you more. And like in quotation marks, I think that we can create narrative and story around the fact that if we just have all these things, it will make us happy. But in the end, I would argue the only thing that makes us happy is relationship. Bitcoin fosters relational wealth above and beyond monetary wealth. And
How do you mean? Explain that.
because I can meet someone in a transaction in which we meet as equals. We are entirely compatible in terms of what our goals are. Our goals aren't to game each other. Our goals aren't to somehow get more than it's pure truth transacted on a network, whether it is, and I kind of believe that if the Bitcoin network plays itself out to its fullest, everything will reside there.